Okay, so this is the Bible study for 2 Samuel chapter 10 and then First Chronicles 19, which is essentially the same story. Chapter 10, the text says, "In the course of time, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me." So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David's men came to the land of the Ammonite commanders said to Hanun their lord, "Do you think David is honoring your father by sending envoys to express sympathy? Hasn't David sent them to you only to explore the city and spy it out and overthrow it?" So Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. When David was told about this, he sent messengers to meet them, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, "Stay at Jericho till your beards have grown, and then come back." When the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rahab and Zobah, as well as the king of Maacah and 1,000 men, with 1,000 men, and also 12,000 from Tob. On hearing this, David sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men. The Ammonites came out and drew up their battle formation at the entrance to the city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and Rehab and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in open country. Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him, so he selected some of the best troops of Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them against the Ammonites. Joab said, "If the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to rescue you. Be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight." Then Joab and the troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites realized that the Arameans were fleeing, they fled before Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. After the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer had Arameans brought from beyond the Euphrates River. They went to Halem and Shobak, the commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. When David was told of this, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Helam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him, but they fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 4,000 of their foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobak, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with the Israelites and became subject to them. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. All right, so our Bible study, remember you can download copies at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you could follow along with us. And number 1 says, what happened in our last Bible study in 2 Samuel 8 and 9? A, David defeated pretty much everyone. He occupied the areas surrounding Israel. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. That's pretty much the same thing as what was said before, but it's that key phrase, I think, that we pulled out several times in the text to just note why this victory was taking place. It wasn't necessarily because David was such a great commander, but because God was with David. C, David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul so I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" That's true. D, David had Ziba, Saul's steward, take care of Saul's possessions and farm his land so that Mephibosheth was also. That's true. E, Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of his sons. And remember, Mephibosheth was a son of Jonathan who was lame in both feet. So we talked about all of that. Number two, what happened in 2 Samuel 10, 1 and 2. So it tells us in the course of the time, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. So we find out Nahash, king of the Ammonites, died. B, his son Hanun succeeded him as king. C, David attacked him like he attacked everyone else. And this is not true. You started to think that all of the answers that I put in here are always true, didn't you? This one's not true. David did not. He said, you know, Nahash has showed kindness to me. We don't have, I look back, I thought, man, did I miss something? But we don't really have, as near as I can tell from reading the commentaries and trying to study back, a record of when this happened. But commentators believe that this was when David was on the run from Saul, and David sometimes sought refuge and tried to connect with people because he was desperate. And it tells us here that this particular king had showed kindness to him. So, whereas other groups were attacking and plundering during Israel, and I know we kind of struggle with David kind of going out and making war with people, but other people were. It was kind of a time of war. It was a time when people were attacking people. People were, raiding and things like that. But David didn't go attack this country, this nation, this kingdom because their king had showed kindness to him. And so what does that say about how David decided who he was going to attack? He attacked the ones that were already hostile to them, to Israel, that were already raiding. And sure, that's probably the majority. We need to understand the kind of world this was. People raided people attacked people. It was hostile. I don't think we have an easy time understanding that sort of world in a time when people who attack somebody unprovoked are just crazy. I mean, we that's what we're saying about Putin right now in our time in our country's history, where he attacked the Ukraine. Why? He's wrong because he attacked unprovoked, right? But it was normal back then for people to attack unprovoked. So then we get kind of bothered by David doing so much attacking and killing, but David wasn't attacking unprovoked. David was attacking the people that were already attacking them, and enemies of Israel. Whereas this particular king had shown kindness to David, so David sent an envoy rather than attacking, to show sympathy to his son and probably to ensure that peace remained under his son the way it had under his father. So it says D, David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. And that's true. David sent a delegation to express sympathy to Hanun concerning his father, and that's true. Number three, what happened when David's delegation went to see Hanun according to 2 Samuel 10, 2b through 4. 2b is the way that we denote, like when a verse, sometimes the way they divided out the verses, one verse is a part of a different, the second part of the verse is a part of a different thought. In the translation that I'm reading, the second part of this verse is a separate sentence and is the beginning of this, and this is English translation, obviously, is the beginning of the sentence that's continued in verse 3, and therefore they've delineated a paragraph right in the middle of this verse, the translators have. So sometimes we don't want to start reading arbitrarily at the beginning of a verse line, we want to start at the beginning of the sentence or at the beginning of the thought. And so sometimes we'll just, you're not going to find a B in there, but we'll delineate or denote to verse 2b, meaning the second part of the verse, and we can start where a new thought. And so usually when we use this, there's a paragraph heading like this one. So 2b starts, when David's men came to the land of the Ammonites, and then verse 3 goes, the Ammonites commander said to Hanun their lord. So that's just the way we kind of try to denote what we're studying. It doesn't really matter from a scripture point of view, since the verse headings weren't put in by the individual writers, and even if they had been, the way we translate things into English may have changed the sentence structure into such a way that that it would move it around. But so the answer to the question is A, they accepted him with thankfulness, which is what you would expect, what you would hope. That's not the case. See, you got into the habit of saying all of the above, didn't you? B, the Ammonite commanders convinced Hanun that David was sending spies and was going to overthrow them. That's what happened. And C, Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. So a couple things. One, there are several cases in scripture, sometimes even in Israel, where a new king comes to power and that king is listening to advisors, and that king may be weak, but they make very unwise decisions earlier in their reign. That happens sometimes in Israel's history. It happens in these other nations too, but that's what happened. Probably a strong king who was wise, who had shown kindness to David, probably because David was at odds with Saul, much like a Philistine king gave David refuge. And this king was probably wise, but his son comes in much younger, much less wise, and begins listening to advisors who maybe paranoid, maybe immature, also maybe his friends that he put in power and in place rather than the advisors that advised his father. It's really hard to say what happened, or maybe it was the advisors that advised his father, but they didn't have as much confidence in his reign, and so felt like they needed to advise him differently. But really, what happened here is a very foolish move. See, David is offering kindness to somebody who offered kindness to him, and they're so paranoid that they think that he's ready to overthrow them like he is everybody else. And so they advise this new young king to provoke war, and that's what he does. Number 4 says, why was this such a big deal? A, what do you mean? That's just embarrassing. So I think it's easy for us to understand why it's such a big deal. Essentially, they cut off their garment, which was probably a long, almost like a robe, what we would consider a robe or a gown. They cut it off at the buttocks, which means basically their bottom half was naked. So it was like they were wearing a shirt and no pants. And so that's obviously embarrassing. So they're going back half naked. In fact, really the important part is naked. So however, I think we know why that's embarrassing, but I'm not sure we fully process why it's embarrassing, the beard part, because that's a very cultural thing. It may be frustrating if somebody shaved half of my beard. It'd be frustrating, but I'd go home and shave the other half, and it would, mine's not very long, it would grow back pretty quickly. And even if it didn't, it's not really a part of my identity. For some people, I think it is. But in that culture, beards were important. This would have been, I think maybe the best way to consider this is it would have been just about as significant as castrating them. It was taking away their manhood. It was taking away something that sort of delineated them as men, and as anyway. So it was the beard was the hardest thing. This was a very significant thing. And so B says the Ammonite, B says this was a direct sign of disrespect in response to an expression of kindness, which is true. That's kind of obvious. That's kind of an understatement, perhaps. C, although the shaving of the beard may be a minor annoyance to us, these two things were the most severe indignity that an Eastern man could suffer at that time. And so there pretty much wasn't anything worse that they could have done to these men. So much so, and David understands that, right? We understand that when David sends people out to meet him, he tells them to go, don't come home, go to some other town until your beards regrow. And that was a kindness. He wasn't sending them in exile. He was trying to protect them from the embarrassment that they were going to experience because of this. And they could go regrow them and then rejoin normal society. But how long does it take for a beard to regrow? We're talking about probably a matter of years, certainly months, but maybe depending on how long it needed to get, it could have been more than a year. And so this is a big deal. So number 5 says, what happened next according to 2 Samuel 10, 5 through 12. And I started this already. This is kind of a summary of the rest of this text, just to get us to the end here. A, David sent messengers to meet the men and tell them to stay in Jericho until their beards had grown and then come back. And that's true. B, the Ammonites had an oh poop moment and hired a bunch of mercenaries to help them defend themselves. And that's true, right? It says, it doesn't say oh poop, I'll admit, but it says when they realized that they had become obnoxious to David, they hired a bunch of army and foot soldiers and these other guys from other nations, because they realized we've provoked war. So now we're pretty much guaranteeing that David's going to come out to meet us. David's going to come out and fight us. Before, it was possible that that's what he was doing, that he was spying, but maybe he was just trying to be nice. Now we can be sure he's going to come out and meet us. So now they realize, oh man, we've put ourselves in a tough position. We better get help. And then C, David sent Joab and the entire army out. So it turns out they were right. D, the Ammonites and the Arameans surrounded Israel in front and behind. So they thought they were slick. The Ammonites set up their army to defend their city, while the people that they hired were basically out in the wilderness, but they were going to gather around back. So Joab realized that he was surrounded with armies on both sides of him, and he split his army. And he kept the masses of the army together, but he took the best of the army and he commanded them. So he had probably a smaller group, but they were better fighters on the other side. And then he put Abishai under command of the rest of the army, kept them fighting the Ammonites, while he went after the smaller group of probably of foot soldiers and people that they had hired. And F says the Ammonites and the Arameans both fled. So it says the Arameans fled first. When the Ammonites saw they had fled, then the Ammonites fled back into their city, basically took refuge and shut the gates. G, the Arameans called for reinforcements and went out again. So that not the Ammonites, the Arameans called for more Arameans to come, because now they were a part of this war and they had been defeated. So they called for more Arameans to come out to fight. So then David gathered, it says, all Israel and crossed the Jordan. So now he, I mean, it was the full fighting force before, but now he says all Israel. I don't know, it's all hands on deck is what it sounds like. You know, every male fighter or anybody that can fight, come out. We're going to war here. And he went across the Jordan to fight these Arameans. All the kings who had been subject to Hadadezer made peace with Israel and became subject to them instead. So basically, the Arameans had kings subject to them. They had sort of a nation developed, but because they got involved in the Ammonites' war that they provoked, which was silly, then now they want to go to war and they think, okay, we'll bring our full fighting force and fight Israel's full fighting force. But what happened was Israel still won and the Arameans ended up fleeing before them again. And now all these other kings that were subject to the Arameans are saying, wait, Israel is the stronger nation. We're going to ally ourselves. We'd rather be subject to the stronger nation, and maybe perhaps the kinder nation if David treats people the way it seems like he was treating people. So they all made peace with Israel and became subject to them instead of the Arameans. So now the Arameans have like their empire is gone, if you will. You know, all their alliances that they may have held by military control have now gone away because they lost to Israel, all because they went to fight the Ammonites, fight with the Ammonites, all because the Ammonites provoked war with David. None of this had to happen. Isn't that the strange thing, is that although David did take the war to people that were causing him problems and people that were within Israel's sort of land, the promised land, David did take war to them, but he didn't take war to the Ammonites. And the Ammonites provoked war, then got the Arameans involved. So now not only have the Ammonites been defeated, but now the Arameans have been defeated and their empire's gone, and it becomes, these other kings become subject to Israel. And it says the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. So all of that happened in the rest of this text, and it's so funny and sad. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it's funny and sad. It's funny and sad to me because I see this kind of thing happen. People make enemies that they didn't need to make. People are selfish or afraid, or people you know, are insecure, and so they go on the attack. I've sat down with individuals, people in the church, that go on the attack when they have no need to go on the attack. Nobody was chasing them, nobody was attacking them, but because they're so insecure, because they're so afraid that you were attacking, they're expecting you to attack. And that's what these guys did. They said, oh, David wasn't trying to be nice, David wasn't sending this envoy for peace and to show sympathy. David wants to spy on you and attack you. And it's that insecurity that has caused Hanun to provoke war. And we still do it today, don't we? So number 6 says, did any of these things of this have to happen given how David started? Yes, no, explain. No, David was sending an envoy of peace and sympathy. What caused all of this? And we can say pride, but I think probably a better answer is insecurity. And in the last part of this says, could you learn from this in your life? Yes, because how many times have we provoked a war or a disagreement, an argument, what maybe even with our spouse? How many times have we provoked something that didn't need to be provoked because we thought they were provoking something with us, because in our mind we thought they were, criticizing us? Or I mean, that happens with me. I've done it. I've been there. uh it's happened to me, where I was talking to somebody and all of a sudden they got defensive and started jabbing at me. One time I sat in a meeting with people from the church, and one person starts attacking, and I'm watching it completely unprovoked, starts attacking. And when we got to the bottom of it, it was because they had misinterpreted something that was said and thought that they were being attacked, when any outside observer, it was really clear there was no attack. And so this happens all the time, and we need to learn from this, because we look just as foolish as this new Ammonite king. He looks young and immature and foolish, and he provokes and ruined a relationship and ruined a peace that he didn't have to ruin. And all of this happened because one guy, and perhaps because of his advisors, was insecure and suspicious and thought somebody was out to attack him when David wasn't even out to attack him. And we need to learn from this, because we ruin relationships just like this. And we cause ourselves harm and problems just like this, for the same reason. When we're so afraid that we end up attacking first. And so we need to learn from it. We need to see the foolishness in this and not let ourselves become subject to this or become prey of insecurities and pride and all of that.